Hello, welcome to Young Healthwatch Hillingdon podcast. My name is Dulpri and I'm a Young Healthwatch member. Also joined along with 3 other volunteers, Ishita, Khadija and Ellie. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hiya, I'm Ellie.
I'm Khadija.
Hi, I'm Ishita.
We also have Lisa, Dan and Ramon.
Hi, I'm Lisa and I work for Healthwatch Hillingdon and I support Young Healthwatch.
Hi, I'm Ramon. I work for Hillingdon Council in the Stronger Communities team.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm the Managing Director of Healthwatch Hillingdon.
The Young Healthwatch are a group of volunteers aged between 11 and 25 working together to represent the voices of children and young people who access health and social care services in Hillingdon. We achieve this through social media and workshop events that promote positive health and wellbeing events for young people. Young Healthwatch decided to do podcasts to reach out to young people and talk about key health and wellbeing topics that are important to people, as well as ensuring that they have access to reliable information from professionals. Therefore, the topic of today's podcast is about COVID-19 vaccinations, talking about the overview of how vaccinations work and are developed, as well as the common myths that are associated with vaccinations that young people may be anxious about. So to help raise concerns about these, to help address these concerns about vaccinations and receive reliable information, we have with us Dr. Hussain Zaheer. So if you could just introduce yourself and give us a little insight into your role as a GP.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Hassan. I'm an NHS-based GP in Hayes and Northwest London. I also do some out-of-hours work as part of my role. And the main thing that I generally tend to do as part of my workload is speak to patients about coronavirus, treat patients with coronavirus in the community, and also just have conversations with them about COVID vaccines and everything related to the pandemic. So I thought it would be useful to come on the podcast and share some of the things we talk about when people have questions about COVID and the vaccine.
There's a lot of different information out there in the news and on the social media as well about the conflicting views and opinions about being vaccinated against coronavirus. So, which is like very confusing for the young people at the moment. So, could you please tell us about how is the vaccine made and like how it works?
The way I like to explain it to patients is that COVID vaccines are essentially, so if you imagine the coronavirus itself, it's like a little golf ball. If you see pictures of it in the news or in the website, and it's got little spikes or structures on its outer coating. These structures are what we call spike proteins. These are basically what the virus uses to enter our body, to convince our body to make lots of copies of itself and also spread. And that's how we get COVID infections. What the vaccines do is they make use of this little protein on the surface and prepare our body to fight the infection. And it does it in sort of 2 main ways. One is that it gives the body or the immune system a memory of the virus. So for example, if we've never been exposed to the virus, but we've been vaccinated, the body will be able to recognize the virus when it does enter our bloodstream, and it makes it much more prepared to fight the infection. The other major thing that the vaccine does is give our body immune structures called antibodies. You might have heard of antibodies if you study biology. They're little proteins or little structures in the body that fight the virus itself. You might have heard in the news and from other people that if you get coronavirus, so the infection for coronavirus, your body does get some natural immunity to the infection as well. But obviously getting coronavirus itself is quite risky, it's dangerous, it's also very unpleasant. So having the vaccine gives us a benefit of being exposed to components of the virus or allows our bodies to sort of recognize the virus without being exposed to the dangers of the virus itself. So that's the main thing that the vaccines do in essence.
These days, a lot of young people are quite curious to know, like when they get the vaccine. So does the vaccine work against all the variants that we have been hearing about, like the Delta variant, the Alpha variant, and etc.?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think there's been a lot of concern in the news at the moment about these different variants that are coming out and how effective the vaccines are. What we do know is that, I can give you some numbers in a second, but what we do know is that if you've been vaccinated, particularly if you've had 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, it does provide significant protection against the variants of coronavirus, particularly the Delta variant, which is the one that's on the rise at the moment. Specifically, if we talk about numbers, we know that if patients or people have had 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine or the AstraZeneca vaccine, they are more than 90% effective against hospitalization, so being sick with the virus and ending up in hospital if it's caused by the Delta variant. So in summary, all the research so far suggests that the vaccinations are effective against the variants. So that's definitely a benefit and one of the reasons why I encourage patients to get vaccines as well.
A lot of young people have a lot of concerns regarding the vaccine and all these rumors going around. So what can young people expect when they get the vaccine, and what are the long and short-term effects? Because I know that a lot of people think, oh, it was developed in such little time, so we don't know much about the long-term.
So let's talk about the side effects or the effects first, because those are very common questions that we get every day about the vaccine. I do have a little section prepared for, or it would be useful also to talk about the development as well, which we can get to, which would be quite handy. So the coronavirus vaccine or the COVID vaccine it's injected into a large muscle in our arm. And that's just because it's got a big blood supply and it allows the vaccine to distribute into the bloodstream effectively. So what you'd expect when you get the vaccine is a little tiny injection into the upper arm or the muscle called the deltoid, which accepts the vaccine. And in terms of side effects, so what I normally tell patients is that it's very common to get a sore arm on the site of the injection. You might feel a little bit tired. You might have a slight headache. You might feel a bit achy in your muscles and in your joints for a little while. Some people report nausea, but that's not as common in my experience. And getting a fever or some chills, feeling a bit under the weather. Those are the most common side effects that we encounter with the vaccine. And again, what I tend to explain to patients is that if you're getting these side effects, in a way, it's a good sign that the vaccine is working, because when your body is preparing itself to fight the coronavirus, these are the stages that it goes through while the immune system is creating your antibodies and the tools that it will use to protect you against the virus. They're very short-lived side effects. They usually tend to last for a few hours. A lot of my patients have no side effects. So there's very much a spectrum. So some people might get 1 or 2 of these. Some people might get none as well. But generally speaking, if you get these side effects, it's not a cause for concern. It's nothing to worry about. And it's actually something I would expect as a response to your body preparing to fight the virus. It might also be useful to talk about long-term side effects. So far, all the research that's done on the vaccines, their long-term side effects with the COVID vaccine are extremely unlikely. So I certainly in my clinical practice haven't seen any long-term side effects from COVID vaccinations so far. There are a few very rare side effects that we would classify in the extremely rare category. That it would be worth talking about. There was a lot in the media and in the news about allergic reactions and also blood clots, which were the 2 main sort of concerns that people had about the vaccine. Initially, there were some concerns about the AstraZeneca vaccine in particular and allergic reactions, but actually what we found with research is that most people with allergies, and that includes food or penicillin-based allergies, they can be vaccinated against COVID-19 very safely. The only advice we generally tend to give is that if you're allergic to the specific ingredients inside the vaccine, which in itself is extremely rare to have an allergy to those constituents, then it would be advisable to avoid that particular vaccine. You may still be eligible for alternate vaccines, depending on which one you're being offered. so that's the important thing that I would say about allergic reactions, is that first of all, they're very rare with the vaccine. And generally, if you have allergies to other things, it should, as a general rule, not affect your ability to have the COVID-19 vaccine. With regards to blood clotting, there was a lot of, again, there was a lot of concern about blood clots early on when the vaccines were first introduced, when we didn't have a lot of information or research about sort of the after effects of the vaccine. But the way that I try and explain the risk for blood clots to patients in particular is that your actual risk of getting a blood clot from the vaccine is minimal or extremely rare. So for sort of under 30s, 1 in 50,000 people will have a chance of getting a blood clot. And that risk is even lower in under 50s, it's 1 in 100,000. So those numbers are extremely minimal when we look at the benefits we're getting from the vaccine. Again, what I try and explain is that actually, if you get COVID-19 virus as an infection, your risk of getting blood clots from that is significantly higher. So compared to the vaccine, 8 to 10 times, you are 8 to 10 times more likely to get blood clots from the infection compared to if you were vaccinated. And you're over 100 times likely to get a blood clot if you're unvaccinated in the community. So those are very significant numbers. And in fact, some patients that tend to be admitted to hospital with severe forms of coronavirus, so we talk about COVID pneumonitis being one of them, which is a COVID disease that affects the lungs, they're almost as a routine covered with anti-clotting medication to prevent the risk of blood clots. That's how significant that risk is. So as a general rule, or sort of what I advise patients is that it's much more safer to receive the vaccine and be safe from coronavirus than to get coronavirus and have that higher risk of getting blood clots from the infection itself, when you know that the risk of getting it from the vaccine is extremely minimal. So the odds are definitely in much more in the favor of the vaccine.
Thank you. That was quite reassuring. I also have a question. Some people have quite a few concerns regarding hormonal issues or the impact on their fertility. So does the vaccine actually affect any of these things?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that COVID-19 vaccinations affect the fertility of men or women. There's even evidence, even from a clinical practice, I see women who come in for their first antenatal appointments all the time, and they've been doubly vaccinated. So lots of women who've had both courses of the COVID vaccine go on to fall pregnant without any problems. And there's no link whatsoever that the COVID-19 vaccines affect your hormones or affect your ability to reproduce in the future. This has been backed up by lots of different organizations who are looking into it. So the British Fertility Society has done studies on it, so has the WHO, and also the JCVI. These are just institutions that research into COVID-19 vaccines and fertility. They've concluded that the vaccines are safe. The vaccines cannot give you or your baby COVID-19. And also they encourage everyone to take on the vaccine without being worried about those risks.
Could you just clarify for us who the WHO are?
Oh, sorry. Yes, so the WHO are the World Health Organization. They're one of the world's leading bodies that's doing research into the COVID-19 virus, COVID-19 vaccinations, and also health problems in comparison to, or in relation to COVID-19. So certainly, what they say, I generally tend to quote to my patients because they've got very well-researched studies. And certainly in this, with this topic in particular, I would reassure you that there's no concerns with fertility and the vaccine.
But a lot of our young people have heard quite a lot of rumours sort of on social media and in school. I just wondered whether the Young Healthwatch members might want to ask some questions about some of those and the sorts of things that they've heard.
I think one of the rumors was, does the vaccine mean the government will be able to track you? So again, I remember with this rumor, there was like a video that was shared on social media making claims about a microchip that is contained in a syringe labeled for COVID-19 vaccine. And there were just claims around um, that the officials can kind of track the patient's location. And then when some officials came out, they were just like, oh, it's to just confirm if that particular vaccination or if that particular injection has been used or if it's expired. So again, there were like a lot of rumors around that. So to what extent is this true?
Yeah, so I can definitely confirm there is no evidence whatsoever that the COVID-19 vaccine has any ability to do any of those things to track you. I mean, the ingredients of the COVID-19 vaccine, they're actually freely available on the websites or the information pages for the vaccine. So I would urge anyone that's worried about what's in the vaccine, they can always look up the active ingredients that are in the vaccine, and that might reassure you somewhat with what's being injected into your body. And I think just on the bigger subject of rumors in general, I do tend to advise people to try and go to the source of the information. So if you're worried about the vaccine, try and go to studies that have been done in an accurate way that can give you healthy, useful information about vaccination. And as a general rule, that goes for anything that you're worried about, particularly in relation to your health. Rumors about, obviously the coronavirus and the vaccines are very topical. Lots of, it's all over the news. People are talking about it. Everyone has an opinion on it. Unfortunately, not everyone with an opinion on it has facts that back that opinion up. And I think that's, without being too harsh, I think that's the reality of it, that a lot of these rumors that are going around, particularly the rumors that we just mentioned about it being able to track you, they're ridiculous, but also more than that, there's no scientific basis to it whatsoever. And anyone that's worried about that, there's lots of information available, which we can talk about where to access it, which can give you insights and evidence-based information about the vaccines and how they work. Certainly, there's no evidence about this at all, and to me, just as a healthcare professional, it just doesn't make any sense. But I can understand if people are talking about it and it's very topical and conversational, then people are understandably worried about this. And it might be useful to talk a bit about vaccines. I mean, they're quite a new phenomenon. COVID vaccines are fairly new, and I think maybe some of these concerns are stemming from how quickly people feel that the vaccines were developed. What people are normally used to seeing is that a vaccine takes many years to be developed, and that is true to an extent. When we talk about vaccine development, there are lots of stages that go into making that vaccine. They start with small studies that talk about the vaccine and analyze it. If those studies are successful, then they're moved on to non-clinical studies, which are studies that don't involve human beings. So that would be either in the test tube or in other living subjects. Again, beyond that, the next step is clinical trials. So trials that involve patients, first on a small basis, and then steadily larger numbers of sizes to the sample. Once it passes all of those steps, then there's other processes involved. So boards get together and they make a decision about how safe it is and whether it's effective. Then when they decide, or if they decide that the vaccine is fulfilling all of those criteria, then you go on to the manufacturing stage, where labs then develop it in small scale and then larger scales. And also safety comes into it very importantly, which is once the vaccine has been tested, there are further studies done to warrant its safety. So you can imagine there's so many steps involved that process usually takes years. But usually that it's important to consider that we're in a global pandemic and the world needs a COVID-19 vaccine. And usually these steps, which would take many years, because the world was allowed to pool their resources together, and people from all over different parts of the world with their individual research were able to bring it all together and also get the funding for it as well, which was much easier given that people needed the vaccine urgently. it allowed us to do these stages simultaneously or at the same time. So while in the usual basis, when we don't need the vaccine very urgently, they would happen one after the other. In the case of the COVID-19 development, they happened at the same time. It's important to mention that no stages were skipped, so there were no shortcuts. There was no sort of rationale that just because we need a vaccine quickly, we can skip one part of the trial. That definitely did not happen. Every aspect of development took place as it should have. But because, as I said, because of increased funding, because of everyone getting their research together, the world coming together almost to make it happen, it allowed it to happen much quicker than it would have on an average basis if we were not in a pandemic. Naturally, with that, I mean, I certainly can see the benefits of it. You know, we're in such a difficult situation in the world, but we're able to come together as humankind and put our brains and our heads together and make this vaccine in such a short space of time. It almost highlights how remarkable we all are when we work together. But at the same time, the flip side is when a vaccine is created very quickly, naturally people would be more worried about its safety and its efficacy. But at the same time, the information is out there for anyone that needs it, and as long as you're confident that it's a reputable resource and the evidence you're getting is based on clinical studies which have been backed up, then you can be reassured. And that certainly is the case with this vaccine.
I have quite a tricky question, I'll be honest. So since we're talking about how we get our news and how we share information, I was actually talking to someone about the vaccine the other day, and they were talking about something on the TV. And obviously, most of the time when we watch TV, we think, oh, everything on there is quite reliable because they're being able to show it on there. But they were talking about these conspiracy theories behind the vaccine that they actually believe, and about how it was tested on animals and all those like mice died during the whole trial and everything. So they think that, you know, it's going to kill humans in the long term and it's bad for them. So what is your opinion on, like, how do we know what is reliable information? Because for a lot of us, if we see stuff on the TV, like documentaries, we normally do think it's reliable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be very useful to have a conversation about this. And I think it's really great that young people are asking these types of questions and they're cognizant to the sort of downfalls of having such freely available information. Information is so widely available. We've got the internet at our fingertips. We've got a smartphone. We've got so many different ways, and all we have to do is type something into Google and we'll get some information about it. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that not all the available information you get is reliable information. And unfortunately, documentaries, even though they're meant to be well researched, sometimes are not. And at the end of the day, it's very important that whatever information you hear, I think that's what I was trying to allude to before, that you go to the source. Where is that information coming from? Often when it's in the documentary, that's not the original source. It's just a way of broadcasting it to you. But actually, whenever you come across something, it's important to go to the right places to get the factual information behind it. If you're, one of the ways you could do that, as I said, is, being aware of what the resources are that give you reliable and useful information. So on the topic of COVID-19 in general, and also vaccinations and anything to do with the pandemic, the NHS website is a very useful resource, not just because of the factual information that's on there. It's also presented in a very easy to understand way, and actually it's very easily shareable as well. So if you're worried about something, if you want to talk to someone about COVID-19 and you want to give them some facts, I normally tend to signpost my patients to the NHS website. The government, the site is also very useful for information about coronavirus. But I think it's definitely important to have a healthy conversation about the information age we're in, the era of information, and there are pros and cons to having so much information, and it's often easy to get overwhelmed by what's out there and how much of it is true and how much of it's false. So I think anytime you're questioning something, I think it's, first of all, it's good to question things in general. If you have questions about things, they're not silly questions. But at the same time, it's also equally important you know where to go to access that information. Googling is not always the answer to everything, unfortunately.
And just to add to that, Young Healthwatch actually we developed a coronavirus hub page on the website so that we can share sort of trusted sources of information, which we will signpost at the end of this podcast anyway. But it's so true. There's so much conflicting information out there, and it's really, really confusing for everybody, actually. And yeah, and like you said before, everyone's got an opinion on it, haven't they, at the moment? So yeah, very good question, I think.
Agreed. But I think the most important thing is that it's really great that young people are questioning the information that they receive from these different sources. I think that's a really healthy thing to do in general. But as I said, yeah, it's about the source, not necessarily the where you're getting the information transmitted to you, but actually where did that information come from in the first place. It might take more work to find that source sometimes, but it's important that due diligence is done so that you don't get wrong information.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to ask you about any advice you have for people that are quite anxious about these rumors, but I feel like you've already answered it. I think the best way to do it is ask a professional or go to a reliable source. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And actually, I think for people just coming back to the COVID vaccine itself as well, lots of young people who would be offered the vaccine, it's very natural to feel apprehensive or worried about getting the vaccine, particularly if you don't remember the last time you had a jab. Maybe if you're a teenager, you may not have had a vaccine for quite a long time, and your last immunizations would have been when you were a child. So, it's very natural to feel that way, first of all. The important thing is that, yes, of course, you can always speak to your GP, to a healthcare professional about the vaccine, not just because we have information about it for you, but also most of us have been, if not all of us, have been jabbed. So we can tell you firsthand what our experiences are with getting the vaccine. But that extends to key workers outside of the NHS as well. So teachers would have been offered the vaccine. So in your school, you can ask your school teachers what their experiences were, how it felt like. Generally speaking, when you're given the vaccine, it can be quite overwhelming when you turn up to the center. So often vaccines are given in places which are not known to be given, known to have vaccinations associated with them. So vaccination centers might exist in theaters, they might exist in stadiums, big spaces like that where you normally go to have fun, but you're going there to have a vaccine. So it can be overwhelming but at the same time, I think it's important that lots of people have been vaccinated, and so you can always ask people that have been vaccinated how they found it and what their experiences were.
Yeah, I've had both of mine actually in two different places. So the first one, I went to the vinyl factory over in Hayes, which is, like you said, is not somewhere that you would usually go to get a vaccine. So it was quite a strange experience, but it certainly wasn't an unpleasant one at all. And then the second one was at a pharmacy. So I think things have changed since the vaccines were first being given, haven't they? So now there's sort of other places that you can be vaccinated that are not on such a large scale, so it's not quite as intimidating, perhaps, as it was.
And the other thing is also when you go to the vaccination center, there'll be doctors there, there'll be nurses there, there'll be healthcare professionals on site who have been trained not just to give the vaccine, but also to answer questions about the vaccine. So I think earlier we talked about worries about allergies to the vaccine. So part of our protocol for healthcare professionals before they give the vaccine is to ask about allergies, to get a history or some information from the patient about their medical conditions. So that information is thoroughly checked before you get given the vaccine. But also, if you have any questions, you can always ask the staff there on the day about it. So it's important to know you won't just be rushed in and be given the jab. There'll be opportunities for you to ask questions as well.
Can I ask the Young Healthwatch members if any of you have had a vaccine yet?
I've had my first dose, the Pfizer, and it was like kind of like a backside story to it. So we were with St. John Ambulance at the time during my shift, and I had my vaccination booked like for a month later. And I got told by a staff member that, oh, they're kind of vaccinating volunteers now, and you can actually get it like today. Today I went for my shift. And I was like, oh, great. And then like, I think a half an hour later, I just started getting a little bit hesitant. I was like, oh, what if I start getting the symptoms and I got some more stuff that I need to do at home? But I guess it was the right decision that I did make at that time, because it was like, I had to get the first dose anyways. So yes, I had my first dose and it was like really rapid and quick. And when I got injected, next minute, I knew it was like all over and done. And touch wood, there was no symptoms or anything, but it was just that my arm was just a little bit sore for the past 2 days. But yeah, I was just glad there was no symptoms on the day or a day after. But yeah, it was a very smooth and a very rapid experience. So it happened really quickly. Next minute, I knew I was literally had my first dose.
Yeah, same. I had a sore arm for about a day.
Yeah.
And just couldn't lift it very much. But actually, that was the only thing that I experienced. So
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, even when I got vaccinated, it was just a little pinch into the arm, and it was over, and before you even know it. And that was the case even with the second vaccine as well. So any side effects you get, it was helpful for me to understand it from a sort of scientific background, that if you do get a little fever or some chill or some muscle aches, that's evidence that the vaccine's actually working and it's doing what it needs to do. But even at the same time, there's a spectrum there. So even if whether you get side effects or you don't, in most cases they'll be very mild. And even if you don't get side effects, there's nothing to worry about. So everyone has a slightly different experience, but a large majority, large amount of people have been vaccinated now, and everyone's been fine so far.
Yep. So next, because we've covered the topic of physical health, we'd also like to talk a bit about mental health, because as Young Healthwatch Hillingdon members, we've been presented with a lot of evidence that shows that many young people are unsure about why they need to have the vaccine when they've been consistently hearing that they are not at a high risk of coronavirus. So do you mind answering the question of why should young people have the vaccine?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, isn't it? There's been a lot of research into which groups or which age groups are more at risk of coronavirus compared to others. So naturally, the young people might have these feelings of questioning why they're being offered the vaccine. Now, there's been a lot of anxiety around transmitting COVID, and particularly if younger people go out for their work or their studies and they come back home, they're worried about spreading coronavirus to more vulnerable people in their household. So that's one of the things that, one of the reasons why it would be very, very beneficial to get the vaccine as a young person if you live with someone who's vulnerable, so that everyone's protected. And I think from a mental health point of view, gives you a lot more reassurance as well. It's many people have that background anxiety ticking in their mind about being worried about their family members and vulnerable household contacts, and having that off your mind can be quite a big stress relief, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what we should do is think of one piece of advice we would give to young person who is anxious about having the vaccine. So do you have one piece of advice that you would give to someone?
I think the biggest piece of advice is if you're anxious or worried, you can always ask someone who's had the vaccine what their experience was. And that includes their GP. So if you have any doubts, that you can always contact your GP for further information. I think that's probably the main piece of advice I would give.
Yeah, thank you. And what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with their mental health at the time of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think the important thing first is that it can feel very isolating and very alone if you're struggling with your mental health. But I think many people, or a large numbers of people, are being affected. I can definitely vouch for just the amount of patients I see who are struggling with their mental health, and I've seen patients of all ages coming to see the GP with concerns about their mental health, and it's completely understandable in the sense that if you're if you're worried about your own health, the health of others, if you add in the isolation with regards to quarantining that we've had to do for such a long time, disruption to our normal social life or school life, if you think of all the factors that are coming into play, it's very understandable why more people are suffering from mental health concerns. The advice I would give to anyone that's suffering from mental health is not to go through it alone, to talk to your friends, to talk to your family about it, but also if you're worried about your mental health, to talk to a professional about it. And that means your GP, but it can also mean your teacher. If you're studying, it can be a counselor in your school or in your uni or your institution. There are lots and lots of resources and help available all over to try and help you with your mental health. And it's very important not to go through it alone.
I think it's worth saying as well that we that one of the first podcasts that Young Healthwatch did was around mental health and where to find support. So for anyone listening to this, definitely look out for the mental health myth busting podcast. And what we can do is we can add a list of resources where you can go to for mental health support if you're struggling.
Yep, so I think our main piece of advice is if you're worried or concerned, always talk to your GP or another health professional.
We hear a lot on the news about the vaccine and herd immunity. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what that actually is and how the vaccine helps with that.
Absolutely. So I think herd immunity, it's something that lots of it's been the topic of news recently, especially around the time the vaccines were being rolled out. I think the main concept behind herd immunity is that if you're an individual that hasn't been exposed to an infection, or you haven't been vaccinated against an infection, if there are significant numbers of people around you that have been protected against the infection, it means that you're much less likely to then get that infection yourself. That's the general concept behind it. And as a rule, the more infectious a disease is, the more people around you need to be protected against it to ensure that herd immunity is achieved. I think the early research into coronavirus about herd immunity amongst epidemiologists was that you need approximately 70% of the population to have immunity to declare that the rest of the group would be protected. That was very early research, so it would be interesting to know what that figure is now. But generally speaking, I think the best way to maybe talk about herd immunity is to use some examples in the past that we've seen successfully. Smallpox was a very, it was a dangerous disease a few hundred years ago. Scores of people were infected by it and unfortunately lost their lives. And when a vaccine for smallpox was introduced, it allowed many significant people to be protected against that illness or that infection. And as a result, because of that protection in large numbers, the infectious nature of the virus, the pathogen was dampened down, and over time we were able to eradicate smallpox just because of the vaccine. So that's the general concept behind herd immunity, is that if enough people around you have protection, and that's why we're driving as many people as possible who are eligible to get the vaccine. It is to achieve this.
Yeah, so a lot of young people are quite concerned and curious about knowing, like, after getting the COVID-19 vaccine, both the doses, can they still catch the COVID-19 virus? Or is that not possible and is just a humor?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So what I tell my patients is that once you've had both doses of the COVID vaccine, it is still possible for you to get the coronavirus. So it's not at all, it's not the case that because you've been vaccinated, you are 100% protected. So no vaccine will be 100% effective against a virus. And that's due to multiple reasons. One of them being that in the future, viruses sometimes do change in their genetic makeup, which as a response to that vaccine. So I think the important thing is you can still get COVID after the 2 vaccines, but the research that's been done so far it proves that, first of all, if you get COVID, the infection itself will be milder usually. So you'll get a milder version of the COVID infection, and also a less severe one in terms of ending up in hospital. So much less people who've been doubly vaccinated will end up in a hospital setting being very sick or very unwell. And the third benefit to getting both vaccines is that you're much less likely to spread coronavirus to other people. So those are some of the benefits of getting doubly vaccinated. Yes, it is still possible to get coronavirus after both vaccines, but your risk of getting it is reduced. And also, as I said, the consequences or the effects of the virus on your body are much less severe.
If I can just jump in and ask a quick question to Dr. Hassan. First of all, thank you very much for this information. Some of the things were really very new to me as well. Recently, we have seen that nightclubs are open and all of this, the social spaces, bars and restaurants, everything is like people have started behaving like the COVID is over. Do you think that we can have potential problems in winters, looking at these queues outside nightclubs and all that?
I think that's a very interesting question. Obviously, we know that large numbers collecting in one place in the past when people were unvaccinated was very risky, and that's one of the main reasons why the lockdown was put in place, so that it prevented this large mixing of groups. I think the important thing is there's still research and studies being done on it to really see the true impact that lifting of lockdown has. I think different countries are in maybe different stages of where they are with their infection status. Some countries have been vaccinated in larger percentages compared to others. And what we're seeing generally is that the number of complications from getting the virus in those populations is much less, and the number of hospitalizations is much less as well. So the general, I mean, it's very hard to say from a GP's perspective, because obviously this is a government-wide query, really. But from a sort of a scientific background, maybe I think obviously if you're doubly vaccinated, generally speaking, you present a lower risk to others around you, but by no means is that risk minimal or zero. So I think you have to look at it in a balanced approach to see the context behind that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to take the opportunity to thank those who were listening, and especially Dr. Hassan. It was a pleasure having you on, and thank you so much for coming. It was very informative and very useful, and especially for those who are still a little bit on edge about getting vaccinated or about vaccinations in general. Hopefully they can find it a little bit useful. And I would also like to take the opportunity to signpost the Healthwatch Coronavirus Hub, which will be signposted below. And it's just giving like a lot of sources of information and support that's available to young people. And because there's just so much out there, and it can just make it really hard to believe like what to believe and what not to. So it's just a whole page which is created, and it has a link to the NHS, the government website, and mental health charity links. So if you find anything useful, please check it out below. And thank you so much for listening, and please wait for our next podcast. And until then, take care and see you soon.